Tonight, we walk beside a crusader. We follow his vow, his burdens, his silence, and his return. Not in haste, not in glory, but in quiet remembrance. So find a place of rest. Let the noise of the day grow distant, and let the road unfold slowly before you. When people imagine the Crusades, they often picture banners fluttering on the battlefield, armies charging with raised swords, or knights gleaming in the sun. But for the men and women who actually lived through those years, the beginning of the crusade was not a clash of arms. It was something far quieter, more uncertain, and far more human. It began with an oath. Not all who set out were noble knights. Some were farmers, merchants, artisans, and servants. They were people who left behind villages, fields, and families to step into the unknown. The choice to take the cross did not happen with trumpets, but often in the hush of a church, under the dim glow of candles, with words murmured in prayer. Imagine the church where this moment unfolded. The walls were of rough-hewn stone, cool to the touch. The floor, worn smooth by countless footsteps, smelled faintly of wax and incense. Candles flickered in small pools of light, leaving most of the room in shadows. The sound of the outside world, the lowing of oxen, the chatter of market stalls, the clatter of carts on cobblestones seemed distant, as though hushed at the threshold. Inside, the air was still. You stand in that stillness, not as a figure from a painting, not as a grand knight of story, but as yourself, uncertain, carrying the weight of questions. The priest before you holds a strip of cloth dyed red. It is small, not ornate, not elaborate. It is a cross, cut and stitched quickly, meant to be sewn onto your tunic. There is no grand armor here, no shining shield, only cloth and thread. The oath you are about to take binds you to a pilgrimage, a journey not measured in weeks, but in years. You do not know if you will return. You do not know if the sea or sickness or hunger will claim you before you ever glimpse Jerusalem. You do not know what lies ahead, only that you have been told it is your duty, your path, your chance for forgiveness. The priest speaks the familiar words. You respond softly, your voice almost drowned by the silence of the church. And then the cloth is pressed into your hands. It is rough beneath your fingers. You kneel while a companion stitches it to your tunic, and as the thread passes through the fabric, the symbol of your vow is fixed in place, a simple cross of red. From this moment on, you are no longer only a farmer, or a son, or a craftsman. You are a crusader. And yet, when you leave the church, the world looks the same muddy streets, the same stone houses, the same dogs wandering between carts. The sky is pale with morning light. Life goes on. Only you feel the difference. The quiet weight of the vow resting on your chest like a stone. In the days after the oath, you prepare for departure. Preparation does not mean gathering armor or weapons, as stories often suggest. For most, preparation meant deciding what to leave behind. Perhaps you have a wife or children. You look at them as they go about their daily routines, tending the hearth, mending clothes, working in the fields. You try to memorize these small details, for you do not know if you will ever see them again. Perhaps you were young, unmarried, with little to your name. You bid farewell to your parents, who look at you with pride, worry, and resignation all mixed together. Their blessing is quiet, their eyes heavy with what cannot be said. You pack little. A woolen cloak for warmth, perhaps a small bundle of coins if you have them, a wooden bowl, a spoon, a flask for water, and for some a small keepsake, a lock of hair, a carved token, a scrap of cloth from home. Armor, if you have it, is patched and second-hand, not gleaming. Your sword, if you own one, is plain. Departure day arrives slowly, with no fanfare. You join others at the edge of the village. Some carry staffs, some lead donkeys laden with supplies. A few are mounted on horses, though most will walk. Children gather to watch, wide-eyed, while elders cross themselves or whisper prayers. The road ahead is long. At first, it is only the same road you have walked many times. The road to the next village, the next town, the fields where wheat grows in long, swaying rows. But today it feels different. Each step takes you farther from home, from the familiar, from what you know. The departure is not filled with shouts or drums, it is quiet. The sound of boots on dirt, the creak of leather straps, the occasional clink of metal. Horses snort softly, someone coughs, someone whispers a prayer. The road stretches before you, pale against the green of the countryside. The first miles pass slowly. The bundle on your back feels heavier than you expected. The air smells of earth and grass, the last sense of home. As the day wears on, you rest by a stream, drinking cool water from your hands. For a moment, you think of turning back, of walking home and pretending this was only a dream. But you look down at the red cross stitched to your tunic, and you know there is no turning back. At night, you sleep on the ground, wrapped in your cloak. The stars above are sharp and clear. Around you, others lie in silence. Some murmur to themselves, some weep softly. Some sleep soundly, exhausted from the day's march. You listen to the sound of wind in the trees, the crackle of a small fire, the shifting of someone nearby. It is not war. It is not glory. It is the beginning of a long journey into the unknown. In the days that follow, you settle into a rhythm. Wake with the dawn, walk until your feet ache. Pause to eat bread or cheese. Walk again until the sun lowers. Make camp. Sleep. The oath you took begins to feel less like a single moment and more like a quiet thread woven through each day. When you stop in villages along the way, people watch you with a mixture of curiosity and awe. Some offer bread or water, believing it a blessing to aid pilgrims. Others look at you with suspicion, uncertain what this flood of travelers means for their quiet lives. Children tug at your cloak, staring at the red cross on your chest. You are marked now, set apart. And yet, in the privacy of your thoughts, you feel no different. You are still yourself, hungry, tired, sometimes uncertain. The cross does not change the man beneath it. At nights, when the camp is quiet, you look up at the stars and think of home. You wonder if the fields have been harvested, if the hearth still glows with fire, if the faces you left behind think of you in return. These thoughts come gently, like a tide. You let them wash over you, then fade into sleep. The oath you took was not dramatic. It was simple, humble, quiet. And yet, in its simplicity, it carried immense weight. It was not only a promise to God, but a surrender of certainty, of comfort, of the life you once knew. As you walk farther from home, step by step, you begin to understand what the crusade truly is. Not a march of glory, not a tale of endless battles, but a journey of patience, of endurance, of waiting and walking, It is the rhythm of the road, the silence of the night, the memory of home pressed like a folded letter against your heart. The oath was the beginning. The departure was the first step, and the long road stretches before you still. The crusade was not a single moment of clashing armies, nor was it a single march that swept swiftly across Europe. It was, instead, a road, a long, unending road that wound across villages, mountains, rivers, and plains. A road that stretched farther than most men or women had ever traveled in their lives. When you first took your vow and left your village, you thought of the destination, Jerusalem. The holy city was the beacon, the promised place where sins might be forgiven, where God's grace awaited. But Jerusalem was not reached in days nor in weeks. It was years away. What most crusaders lived was not the sight of Jerusalem, but the long road east, the daily rhythm of walking, of hunger, of cold, of sun and dust. The crusade was not an event, it was a journey, and that journey was measured step by step. At dawn, the road stretched out before you, pale beneath the morning light. The air was cool, carrying the scents of damp earth and dew-soaked grass. Birds stirred in the hedges, their songs faint beneath the sound of boots against dirt. The company you traveled with was not an army in formation, but a long, uneven column of men, women, and animals. There were armored knights, yes, but they were few, their horses standing taller than most men's heads. There were peasants with walking staffs, tradesmen leading donkeys burdened with bundles, women carrying infants swaddled close to their bodies. Children walked barefoot, skipping along the road, their laughter breaking the heavy silence. You walked among them, your steps steady but slow. The pack on your back weighed more with every hour, though it carried little more than food, a cloak, and your simple tools. The sun rose higher, and with it came heat. Soon, your cloak was tied at your waist, your tunic clinging to your skin with sweat. The crusade was not a march of glory. It was a march of endurance. By midday, the column of travelers stopped to rest. Bread was brought out, hard as stone, broken into rough pieces. Cheese was crumbled, dried meat softened in water, and for some, a small flask of wine was shared among friends. Meals were not feasts. They were quiet, functional, eaten with more weariness than joy. You sat by a stream, dipping your hands into the cool water, drinking deeply. The sound of the current was soothing, a reminder of life's simple needs. Around you, voices rose and fell. Stories of the villages left behind, songs half-remembered, prayers murmured. Children splashed in the shallows, their laughter carrying over the water. When the rest was done, the march began again. The sun now high, shadows shrinking beneath feet. The road stretched endlessly, disappearing into the horizon. Some days it wound through green hills dotted with sheep. Other days it cut across plains where the wind carried dust into your eyes. Always it was the same rhythm. The nights were as important as the days. When the sun sank low, the column stopped to make camp. Cloaks were spread on the ground, small fires lit, animals tethered. The air cooled quickly, and smoke drifted upward into the night. The sky was vast, littered with stars that seemed brighter than anything seen from the village hearth. It was in the camps that you truly lived the crusade. There were no battles, no grand speeches. Instead, there were fires, where men told stories of home. There were women soothing children to sleep, their lullabies soft and steady. There were prayers, said together or alone, the words rising like smoke into the dark. The camp was alive with small sounds, the crackle of wood, the stamping of horses, the cough of a man in the shadows, the low hum of conversation. And then, as exhaustion overcame the camp, silence fell. Only the occasional shift of a sleeper or the soft whinny of an animal broke the stillness. You lay on your cloak, staring at the stars. The road behind was already long, yet the road ahead was longer still. Jerusalem felt impossibly distant. What was near, what was real, was the sound of your own breath and the ache of your own feet. The road east was not only a path of hardship, it was also a path of discovery. For many Crusaders, this was the first time they had traveled beyond their home region. Villages and towns along the way brought new sights, new sounds, new smells. In the markets of larger towns, you saw goods you had never known existed. Spices that smelled sharp and sweet. Fabrics dyed in deep colors. Pottery painted with intricate designs. The voices of merchants filled the air, calling out in dialects that twisted words into unfamiliar shapes. To walk east was to see a wider world. The crusade, for all its hardships, was also a teacher. It showed men and women how vast the world truly was, how varied its people, how endless its roads. And yet, for every market filled with color, there were stretches of empty land where no houses stood, where the road wound only through fields or forests. These were the loneliest times, when the march became endless and your thoughts turned inward. The march carried dangers beyond fatigue. Sometimes the road cut through wild lands where wolves howled at night, their cries echoing across the camp. Sometimes rivers swelled with rain, forcing the column to wade waist-deep, gripping bundles above their heads as the current pulled at their legs. Sometimes sickness spread, one man coughing, then another, until whole groups were too weak to walk. When illness came, the march slowed. Some fell behind, left with prayers whispered over them, too weak to continue. The crusade did not wait for the sick. The road always pulled forward, step by step, mile by mile. Despite the hardships, there were moments of beauty. There were mornings when mist clung to the fields, turning the world silver. The column moved quietly, footsteps muffled, breath visible in the chill air. The rising sun painted the horizon with soft gold, and for a moment, all was still and peaceful. There were afternoons when the road curved to reveal a wide valley, green and fertile, dotted with villages and winding rivers. The sight lifted weary spirits, reminding travelers that the world held more than dust and hunger. And there were evenings when the sky blazed with colors, red, orange, purple, as the sun sank behind distant hills. Travelers stopped to watch, silent, their faces lit by the fading light. For a few breaths, the hardships of the road were forgotten. The road east was not a single path. Different groups took different routes, some through Hungary and the Balkans, others along the Mediterranean coast, others across the sea. Each road brought its own trials, its own landscapes, its own encounters. But no matter the route, the rhythm was the same. Walk, rest, eat, sleep, and walk again. The road became a part of you, as natural as breathing. You began to measure life not in years or seasons, but in miles walked and rivers crossed. The destination was distant, but the road itself became your world. As weeks turned into months, memories of home grew softer, blurred by the constant rhythm of travel. You thought less often of the hearth, the fields, the familiar faces. Not because you had forgotten, but because the road demanded your attention. The present, your aching feet, your empty stomach, the campfire before you, became all you could hold. The crusade, for most, was not a story of battles and victories. It was a story of the road, a story of endless walking, of shared bread, of nights beneath stars. It was a story of patience, of endurance, of faith that the destination, though distant, though unseen, was worth the journey. And so, each day you rose with the dawn, shouldered your pack, and took another step. The road stretched on, and you followed it east. When people imagine a crusader, they often think first of armor. Shining plates, polished helmets, great shields painted with crosses. Images taken from paintings, from stories, from memory, shaped long after the fact. But for most crusaders, armor was not a constant companion. It was a burden, heavy and cumbersome, carried more often than worn. The true life of armor was not in battle, but in waiting, not in glory, but in weight. A chainmail hauberk, the shirt of interlinked rings, was the most common protection. It was a marvel of craftsmanship. Thousands of tiny metal loops hammered, shaped, and joined together, each one closing into the next like a woven fabric of iron. When laid flat, it shimmered dully, more gray than silver, its surface uneven, its rings clinking softly as they shifted. To lift it was to feel its weight immediately, 40 pounds, sometimes more, depending on its length and thickness. You stood with arms outstretched while another man lifted it over your shoulders. The rings dragged across your tunic with a metallic hiss. As it settled onto your body, the weight pressed down at once. On your shoulders, on your chest, on your hips. The sensation was not one of power, but of confinement. Your breath came shorter. The fabric beneath stuck to your skin. Your movements grew slower, heavier. The armor protected you, yes, but it also restrained you, enclosing you in a cage of metal that clinked and shifted with every step. Most days you did not wear it. On the road, armor was carried, rolled into bundles, slung across the backs of donkeys or strapped to carts. It moved with you, but not upon you. To wear it in the heat of the march would exhaust you before midday. The sun striking the iron turned it hot, burning against your skin. The weight dragged down your limbs until even lifting your feet became labor. So you walked, in tunic and cloak, armor, close at hand, but not on your body. You knew it was there, waiting. Its presence was felt not in sight, but in memory. The ache of your shoulders, the pressure on your chest, the sound of rings rattling faintly when the bundle was moved. Armor was both security and threat. Security because you knew it could save you in danger. Threat because you knew it could kill you if worn too long in the wrong conditions. Heat stroke, drowning if you fell into water. To wear armor was to gamble safety from weapons, risk from the elements. Helmets, too, were burdens. A conical helm of iron pressed down on the head like a weight of stone. Vision narrowed, hearing dulled. The world became smaller, darker, as though seen through a tunnel. To strap the helmet beneath your chin was to enter another world. Sounds became muffled, voices distant, footsteps hollow. The air grew hot, stifling. Sweat gathered quickly, dripping into your eyes. Breathing was harder, shallow, and warm. And so, like the hauberk, helmets were carried more often than worn. Hung from saddles, strapped to carts, polished when possible, but rarely shining. When finally set upon the head, they marked a shift, the moment when waiting ended and danger approached. The shield was perhaps the most personal piece of all. Large, curved, often painted with a cross or simple emblem, it was both protection and identity. To carry a shield was to carry your place among the others. But shields, too, were heavy. Carried on the back, they knocked against your legs. Carried at the side, they wore down the arm until muscles ached. At camp, shields leaned against tents or trees, their painted surfaces scratched and faded by dust and rain. The shield did not gleam. It dulled. Its wood swelled with moisture, its paint flaked, its rim split with use. Still, it remained close, a wall between you and harm, a companion that followed wherever you went. To live with armor was to live with constant weight. Even when not worn, it shaped your days. You had to care for it, clean it, repair it. Rust was the constant enemy. In the damp of night, in the mist of morning, iron darkened and roughened, eating itself from within. So you rubbed it with oil, scraped it with cloth, polished it until the dull gleam returned. Hours spent not in fighting, but in maintenance. You carried armor on carts, on donkeys, on your own back. You packed it carefully, knowing that in a moment of danger you might need it quickly. You cursed its weight, its bulk, the endless labor of carrying it mile after mile. Armor was a paradox. It was hated and needed, cursed and cherished. At night, when the camp grew quiet, you sometimes ran your hands over the rings of chain mail. The surface was rough, cold at first, then warm beneath your touch. Each ring had been shaped by another's hands, forged in fire, bent and hammered into place, thousands of them linked together into a single garment. You thought of the smith who had made it, perhaps a man in a small workshop hammering by lamplight his, children asleep in the corner. Perhaps he never traveled more than a mile from his forge. And yet, his work now traveled east, protecting a stranger he would never meet. In that thought, armor was no longer only a burden. It was a thread, connecting distant lives, the smith's hands, your shoulders, the unseen battles ahead. There were times when armor was worn for days when danger loomed close. Then you learned the true meaning of its weight. Walking in armor was not like walking in cloth. Each step was effort. The rings shifted, pulling against each other, pinching the skin beneath. Your shoulders ached, your legs grew heavy, sweat poured from your body, trapped beneath the metal, soaking your tunic. To sleep in armor was to sleep in discomfort. You lay on the ground, the rings pressing into your body, leaving red marks that lingered long after you removed it. Every movement woke you. In those days, the body was tested more than the spirit. Armor reminded you of your limits, of the fragility hidden beneath iron. Yet for all its weight, armor offered something else, a strange sense of calm. When finally worn, when the helmet pressed down, when the shield rested on your arm. You felt enclosed, contained. The world narrowed. The noise of the camp, the chatter of companions, the cries of children, all seemed distant. Within the cage of iron and wood, there was only your breath, your heartbeat, your body carrying itself forward. Armor created a private silence, even in the midst of many. For some, it was suffocating. For others, it was a kind of prayer. To carry armor east was to carry a symbol, not just of war, but of identity, of promise. The cross painted on the shield, the rings forged into hauberk, the helmet strapped to the head. They all spoke of belonging to something larger than yourself. And yet, beneath the iron, you were still only a man. Your body ached, your skin bruised, your breath shortened. The armor did not make you more than human. It reminded you of how human you were. The weight of armor was not only physical, it was also spiritual. Each time you lifted the hauberk, each time you strapped the helmet, you remembered the vow you had taken. The red cross on your chest, the cloth sewn to your tunic, was echoed by the iron that now pressed down on you. Both were burdens. Both were promises. Armor was not worn every day, yet it shaped every day. It waited at the edge of your sight, at the edge of your thoughts, a constant reminder of what lay ahead. And so, as the road stretched east, armor was never far. Heavy when carried, heavier when worn, it marked your life with its presence. The crusade was not endless battle, it was endless waiting. And in that waiting, the weight of armor was always with you. If armor was the weight that pressed on the body, prayer was the weight that pressed on the soul. Every step eastward was walked beneath a vow. Every mile traveled was carried in the name of a promise, and in the stillness between marches, when the campfires flickered low, when voices quieted and the world grew softer, prayer filled the silence. For a crusader, prayer was not an occasional act. It was the rhythm of life itself. At dawn, before the sun broke the horizon, the first sounds of the camp were not weapons or hooves, but murmurs of prayer. Men stirred from sleep, pulling cloaks tighter against the chill, forming small groups where words rose together into the air. The prayers were simple, drawn from memory, often whispered rather than sung. The Pater Noster, the Ave Maria, the Psalms, words spoken again and again until they were as familiar as breathing. The repetition soothed, steadying the mind for the road ahead. Kneeling on hard ground, hands folded or lifted, the Crusaders let silence carry the spaces between words. Prayer was not always sound. It was posture. It was breath. It was the pause that followed each utterance. The journey east was long, and so was the life of waiting. Battles were rare. Silence was constant. In that silence, prayer became a companion, a second voice living within. You prayed for protection, for endurance, for forgiveness. You prayed for the family left behind, for the friends who walked beside you, for the souls of those who would not return. Sometimes the words came easily. Sometimes they faltered, replaced by nothing but a long gaze into the distance. Not every prayer was spoken aloud. Some lived only in the heart, unformed, felt more than said. At midday, beneath the sun, prayer was shorter. A glance upward, a hand to the chest, a muttered phrase as the march continued. Sweat fell, dust rose. Steps dragged on, and yet a quiet plea might pass between breaths. Domine, dirige nos. Lord, guide us. Prayer did not stop the weight of armor, nor the ache of feet, nor the thirst of the throat, but it gave each hardship a place. It gave each mile meaning. At dusk, when the camp was made, prayer deepened again. Tents raised, fires lit, bread shared. Then, when the work slowed, men gathered once more. The evening prayers were softer, more weary, but often more heartfelt. In the glow of firelight, faces bent low, shadows flickered. Voices blended into a murmur that seemed to rise like smoke into the night. Sometimes priests led them, with chant and psalm. Sometimes a knight spoke words for his companions. More often, it was simple. A cluster of men, tired and quiet, their voices low and steady, ending the day as it had begun, with words given to God. The silences that followed were as important as the prayers themselves. After the Amen, after the voices fell, the stillness was complete. The night sounds filled in. Wind in the grass, a donkey shifting, wood crackling on the fire. In that quiet, men sat with their own thoughts, their own burdens, their own unspoken prayers. Silence was not empty. It was full of listening. There were chapels along the way, small stone buildings in villages, larger ones in towns. Entering them, even briefly, was to step out of the dust and noise of travel into another world. The air was cooler, the light dimmer. Candles flickered, their smoke curling upward. Icons and crosses caught the eye. The sound of footsteps echoed softly on stone. Here, prayer deepened further. Men knelt before altars, kissed the wood of the cross, touched relics when offered. The weight of distance, of the long road behind and ahead, seemed lighter for a moment in those sacred walls. But chapels were rare. More often, the earth itself became the church. A field at dawn, a roadside at dusk, a hill beneath the stars. Wherever men gathered and prayed, the ground itself became holy. Not all prayers were for glory. Many were for survival. You prayed for clean water, for strength to rise again after illness, for safe passage through hostile lands, for rain to stop, for storms to pass, for the food to last. Prayers were as human as the men who said them, some noble, some fearful, some desperate. All rose into the same air, mingling with smoke, with dust, with silence. For many, prayer was also memory. Each time words were spoken, thoughts turned homeward, to the church where you first learned them, to the voice of a priest now far away, to the sound of bells ringing in the village where your journey began. In prayer, you carried home with you. And yet, prayer was not only comfort, it was also burden. Each word reminded you of the vow you carried. Each silence pressed you with its weight. To pray was to remember why you were here, and that remembering could be heavy. The cross sewn to your cloak was matched by the cross you bore in spirit. Sometimes silence was easier than prayer. Sometimes you sat with head bowed and said nothing at all. That too was prayer. The rhythm of days shaped by prayer created a kind of stillness, even in the midst of motion. Dawn, noon, dusk, night. Words spoken, silences kept. The journey east was not only through lands and miles, but through hours of prayer that stretched on like the road itself. Prayer did not shorten the distance. It made the distance bearable. At night, when stars filled the sky, silence deepened most of all. Men lay on the ground, cloaks wrapped tight, fires fading. Some whispered prayers before sleep. Others let silence carry them into rest. The stars were countless, scattered like grains of salt across the dark. Looking upward, you felt both small and held. The silence was vast, but not empty. In it, prayer lingered, even without words. And so eastward you went, carried not only by your feet, not only by your companions, but by the prayers and silences that filled every day. If prayer was the rhythm of the soul, hunger was the rhythm of the body. Every man who journeyed eastward carried not only his armor, his shield, and his vow, but also the quiet, persistent ache of hunger. It was the companion that never left, the whisper that followed each mile. Bread, simple, plain, sometimes hard as stone, was the answer most often given to that hunger. And yet, bread was never enough. Food was never certain. The crusade was not supplied like an army of kings, with carts overflowing and wagons prepared in advance. It moved like a great tide of people, spilling across lands that had to provide as they could. Villages, towns, fields, all were asked, sometimes begged, sometimes forced, to feed the passing host. And so each day began not only with prayer, but with the question, what would we eat? Bread was the heart of the answer. It was not the soft, fragrant bread of modern memory. It was coarse, dense, often baked with barley or rye, sometimes with oats, sometimes with whatever could be ground into flour. Stones from the mill often broke into the dough, so that biting into a loaf meant biting also into grit that wore down the teeth. Fresh bread was rare. More often, loaves were baked in haste, hardened quickly, and carried for days until they grew tough, almost unbreakable. A loaf might be soaked in water or wine just to make it chewable. Men broke their teeth on bread, and still they ate it. Because bread was not only food. Bread was survival. Alongside bread came whatever else could be found. Salted meat, if luck allowed. Fish caught in rivers or traded in markets. Onions, beans, lentils, foods that traveled well and lasted longer than most. But just as often, there was nothing more than bread. And when bread ran out, hunger sharpened. The body reminded you in ways that could not be ignored. At first, the stomach growled, a hollow echo that passed after a time. Then, the weakness set in. The legs grew heavier, the arms slower, the thoughts duller. Hunger slowed everything, as though the air itself had grown thick. Men spoke less when hungry. Their voices dropped to murmurs, their words shorter. Eyes turned downward, away from companions, toward the ground, toward the thought of food that was not there. Children cried more in hunger. The sound lingered in the camp, sharp and thin, like a note that would not fade. When food was found, it was shared, though not always equally. Knights often had more than footmen, priests more than peasants. Yet hunger made men generous at times, for to see another suffer was to see a reflection of yourself. Bread was broken, passed from hand to hand, a heel here, a crust there. A small piece, chewed slowly, swallowed carefully, savored even when it was stale. The act of breaking bread together became almost sacred, not only filling the stomach, but binding the company. In those moments, hunger was not only endured, but shared. Sometimes Markets along the way offered abundance, a sudden richness of fruit, of vegetables, of wine. For a night men feasted, laughter rose, voices lifted. But such moments were rare. More often, food was scarce, and hunger returned as surely as the sun. The smell of bread baking could travel across a camp like incense. When someone managed to bake fresh loaves, even crude ones made in simple ovens of clay or stone, the aroma carried on the wind, drawing eyes, stirring the stomach. It was not only the body that longed for it, but the heart. For bread carried memory. Each man remembered the bread of his own village, his own home, the taste of his mother's loaf, the warmth of an oven he would never see again. To chew even coarse bread on the road was to taste, however faintly, that memory. Bread was more than food. Bread was home. There were darker moments, too. When food ran thin, when famine loomed, hunger turned men hard. Arguments broke out. Loaves were stolen. Children went without so that men could march. Horses, once companions, became meals when no other choice remained. The sound of hunger was no longer only the stomach. It was the sound of quarrel, of grief, of silence heavy with despair. But always, bread returned, in one form or another, in one place or another. A loaf traded, a crust given, a handful of flour baked into flat cakes over a fire. However small, however plain, it was enough to carry the company one more day. The journey east was measured not only in miles, but in loaves. Each one eaten was another step taken, another day endured. At night, men dreamed of food, not of glory, not of battles, not of victory, but of bread, of meat, of the tables of home. Dreams of feasts, of kitchens, of ovens glowing with heat. And in the morning, the dream faded into hunger once more. It was a cycle without end, shaping every day, every step. Hunger, bread, hunger again. And yet hunger carried meaning, too. Priests reminded the company that to hunger was to share in Christ's suffering, that to eat bread, even coarse and hard, was to remember the Last Supper, the breaking of bread that bound disciples to their Lord. Bread was not only the food of survival, but the food of faith. Each crust was a reminder of sacrifice, of endurance, of promise. And so, even in hunger, there was purpose. Even in emptiness, there was meaning. The memory of hunger lasted longer than the memory of battles. Long after the crusade, men remembered the aching stomach, the endless search for food, the taste of bread chewed slowly in silence. Hunger marked the journey as deeply as prayer, as heavily as armor. Because to live as a crusader was not only to fight, it was to endure, and nothing tested endurance more than hunger. In the end, hunger was the companion you could not leave behind. Bread was the gift you never ceased to seek, and together, hunger and bread wrote the story of your days on the road to the east. The crusade was not fought only with swords and shields. It was lived in the miles between battles, in the long, slow march across fields, across plains, across mountains, across lands that did not welcome you. And more than anything, it was lived in the dust. Dust rose with every step, clinging to the skin, settling into the mouth, blinding the eyes. Sweat followed, pouring down the face, soaking the tunic, darkening the cloak. Together, dust and sweat became the true garments of the Crusader. They were the marks of the road, as constant as hunger, as inescapable as silence. Each morning began clean, or as clean as possible. Men splashed water onto their faces from skins or streams. Cloaks were shaken out. Sandals or boots were fastened tight. For a moment, there was freshness in the air. Cool mist, dew on the grass, the faint smell of morning fires. But the freshness never lasted long. With the first steps of the march, dust began to rise. The weight of hundreds of feet and hooves ground the road into powder. The powder lifted into the air, carried by the wind, settling into everything it touched. By midday, every face was coated. Skin turned the color of the road, hair matted with grit. The taste of dust filled the mouth, a dryness that no sip of water could wash away. Sweat followed quickly beneath the sun, beneath the burden of armor when worn, beneath the endless motion of the march. Sweat poured. It stung the eyes, ran down the back, soaked the cloth until it clung heavy against the body. There was no escaping it. You could wipe your brow, wring your cloak, drink deeply, still it returned. Sweat was not a moment, but a river, unending, flowing as long as you moved forward. The smell of sweat filled the air as much as dust did. It mixed with leather, with iron, with smoke, with the scent of animals. The camp was marked by it, every gathering steeped in the same sharp odor. Men grew accustomed to it, though never truly comfortable. You learned to live with dust in your teeth, with sweat in your eyes. You learned to breathe through cloth pulled over your mouth, to blink often, to endure. Yet endurance was not silence. There were curses muttered at the heat, at the dryness, at the endless march. There were groans as men stumbled, laughter when someone coughed up a cloud of dust after a fall. Even hardship had its humor, though it was tired, bitter humor. The animals suffered most of all. Horses, donkeys, oxen, their hides gleamed with sweat, their sides heaved, their mouths foamed. Dust clung to them, too, turning their coats pale, caking their nostrils, reddening their eyes. Many fell by the roadside, unable to rise again. The sight of an animal collapsing was heavy, not only pity, but fear, for without them, burdens grew greater, carts stalled, food and armor were harder to carry. Each beast lost meant another weight for men to shoulder. Water was the only relief, and water was never certain. When a stream appeared, cupping their hands, splashing their faces, letting the coolness wash the dust away for a moment, helmets and bowls were filled. Animals lowered their heads and drank deeply. But streams were rare. More often there was only a skin of water, warm from the sun, rationed carefully. A swallow here, a mouthful there, never enough to quench, only enough to endure. And so the thirst deepened, dust thickened, sweat poured. The body carried on, weary but unyielding. At camp, dust and sweat did not leave you. They followed into rest. When you lay down at night, you felt the grit on your skin, the stickiness of sweat on your clothes. You turned on the ground, seeking comfort, but the body remained heavy, unclean. Dreams came slowly, if at all, broken by thirst, by the cough of dust still lingering in the lungs. In the morning, you rose again, washed if you could, shook out your cloak, tightened your sandals, and began once more. Dust and sweat were not only burdens, they were also reminders. They reminded you that the journey was not a tale of glory, but of endurance, that the crusade was not a march of saints and heroes alone, but of men whose bodies ached, whose skin burned, whose lungs choked. They reminded you of your own limits, that beneath armor, beneath vows, beneath prayer, you were flesh, fragile and fleeting. And yet they reminded you also of your strength, for still, each day, you walked. Still, each day, you endured. In the silence of the road, dust rose like a veil around you. The sun burned, sweat fell, and the world narrowed to the rhythm of your steps, the sound of your breath, the weight of your body moving forward. The mind quieted in those hours. Thoughts dulled, words faded, and only the march remained. Dust and sweat stripped away all else, leaving nothing but the bare act of endurance. For some, that silence was torment. For others, it was peace. At times, rain came. Then the dust turned to mud, clinging to boots, sucking at the feet with every step. Sweat cooled, bodies shivered. Cloaks grew heavy with water. Hardship shifted form, but did not disappear. Dust became mud, heat became chill, but endurance was still required. When the sun returned, the mud dried into new dust, and the cycle began again. The memory of dust and sweat lingered long after the crusade itself. More than the clash of steel, more than the cry of battle, men remembered the endless road, the choking dust, the heat that soaked them through. Because that was the true life of the Crusader. Not moments of triumph, but days of dust. Not songs of victory, but the silence of sweat. To be a Crusader was to live with dust in your mouth, sweat on your skin, thirst in your throat, and still to take another step. That was the true march to the east. No one walked east alone. Though each man had taken his own vow, left his own family, carried his own burdens, the road was never solitary. The crusade was not a march of isolated souls, but of companions, men and women, children and elders, nobles and peasants, bound together not only by cause, but by necessity. The journey itself made companions of strangers. At the start, you traveled with those you knew, brothers from your village, knights from your lord's hall, men whose voices and faces were familiar. These were your first circle, companions of blood, of friendship, of long memory. But as the road lengthened, that circle widened. The crusade gathered thousands, and step by step, faces once strange became known. A man who walked beside you for a day might walk beside you for a month. His story became part of your own. Companionship was not chosen so much as formed, shaped by the road itself. There was comfort in numbers, when dust rose and hunger pressed, when silence grew long. The presence of another softened the weight. A word exchanged, a laugh shared, a song carried on tired voices. These were small things, yet they lifted the spirit. Even in silence, the nearness of others mattered. To hear another's footsteps beside your own, to see another face in the firelight, to know you were not alone in your endurance, this was a kind of sustenance, as necessary as bread. Knights traveled among peasants. Priests walked beside soldiers. Women carried children. Elders leaned on staffs. Merchants led carts. The crusade was not only an army, it was a moving world. In this world, companionship was uneven but real. A knight might share bread with a peasant. A soldier might help carry a merchant's goods when a cart broke. A woman might tend to a wounded stranger's arm as though it were her brother's. Need crossed the boundaries of class and rank. The road had little patience for pride. Friendship deepened in small acts. A man offering his cloak to one shivering at night. A boy filling another's water skin when his was empty. A soldier singing softly to comfort a restless child. These moments did not change the world, but they changed the march. They reminded you that hardship was shared, not borne alone. Companions also quarreled. Hunger sharpened tempers. Thirst shortened patience. Arguments flared over bread, over space at the fire, over words spoken in weariness. Yet even quarrels rarely broke companionship. Anger cooled, apologies muttered, silence resumed. For in the end, the road bound you together more tightly than any division could loosen. You could not walk to Jerusalem alone. You needed others, even when they troubled you. There were those who became more than companions. They became brothers, not by blood, but by bond. You marched together day after day, shared bread, shared silence, shared prayer. You lifted each other when one stumbled. You guarded each other in danger. You trusted each other with your weariness. These bonds were not forged in glory, but in endurance, and because of that, they often lasted a lifetime. Stories were exchanged as the miles passed. Around fires, on the road, in moments of rest, men told of their homes, their families, their memories. One spoke of fields left behind, another of a wife waiting, another of a son too young to remember him. Tales of saints were told, too, of miracles and visions. Priests spoke of holy relics, of Christ's passion, of Jerusalem itself. Stories filled the silence, turned miles into hours, softened the sharp edge of longing. Songs were sung, though often softly, more murmured than shouted. Simple chants, pilgrim hymns, folk songs remembered from childhood. The rhythm of feet matched the rhythm of voices. For a time the road seemed lighter. Even laughter was found. Not loud, not boisterous, but gentle laughter. At a stumble, at a jest, at a memory shared. The sound of it carried through dust and sweat like a breeze, brief but refreshing. Children brought their own companionship. Their presence was both burden and gift. They slowed the march, their cries added to the weariness. But they also reminded the company of innocence, of hope, of life beyond the road. Their laughter, when it came, lifted spirits. Their sleep, curled against their mothers, softened the harshness of the night. To see a child safe in the arms of his parent was to remember why the journey mattered. Animals, too, were companions of a kind. Horses carried knights and bore burdens. Donkeys hauled goods. Dogs trotted alongside scavenging scraps, barking at strangers. Even oxen became familiar presences, part of the living company. When an animal died, grief was felt, not only for the burden it carried, but for the companionship it had given. The road was quieter without the sound of its steps. Companionship was not always visible. Sometimes it was simply the feeling of walking within a great company. Thousands stretched ahead and behind, the line unbroken across the land. You were one among many, your life woven into a tapestry of countless others. This belonging gave strength. It reminded you that the burden of the road, though heavy, was shared by all. At night, companionship was seen most clearly. Around fires, men sat together, voices low, stories told. The flicker of flames lit faces, weary but alive. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled not with loneliness, but with presence. You slept with others close by, their breathing in the dark a steady reassurance. Even in dreams, you were not alone. The memory of companions outlasted the memory of hardship. Long after the dust was forgotten, long after the battles blurred, men remembered the faces beside them on the road. The friend who shared bread, the priest who spoke prayers, the child who laughed, the stranger who became a brother. These were the true treasures of the crusade, not victories, not relics, not spoils, but the bonds formed on the long road east. In the end, to be a crusader was not only to march toward a distant city. It was to walk with companions, to share hunger and prayer, to carry one another's burdens, to find in the endless road not only hardship, but fellowship, for no one walked east alone. The road east did not only lengthen in miles, it also widened, opening onto lands that seemed to Crusader eyes strange and unfamiliar. To step beyond the familiar villages and fields of Europe was to enter another world, one where the air felt different, where the soil bore new colors, where the voices of strangers spoke in tones and syllables the ear had never known. It was not Jerusalem yet, but it was no longer home. The first strangeness came in the land itself. Forests grew thinner, replaced by plains that stretched farther than sight. Rivers ran broader, their currents strong and strange. Hills rolled, carrying the road endlessly upward and downward, each rise opening onto landscapes that felt distant, unfamiliar. The air carried scents not known in your village. Spices drifting from markets, smoke from fires built of woods unlike your own. Even the winds seemed different, sharper, drier, carrying with them a taste of lands far from home. Villages appeared, yet they were not the villages of France or England or Germany. The roofs were shaped differently, the houses built of other stone, the streets narrower or broader. Carts moved with different wheels, drawn by animals less familiar. In the fields, crops grew that you did not know by sight. The people watched you as you passed. Their clothes, their language, their manner of standing and speaking marked them as different. Sometimes they were curious, sometimes wary, sometimes silent. You felt yourself a stranger, marked as other. Markets revealed more strangeness still. You saw spices set out in heaps, their colors rich, reds, yellows, browns, deep greens. The air was heavy with their fragrance, unfamiliar and strong. You saw fabrics woven in patterns you had not seen, dyed with hues brighter than those worn at home. There were tools shaped differently, vessels carved of woods or metals that felt foreign in a hand. Foods were offered whose taste was unknown, fruits with skins of strange texture, breads spiced with herbs not grown in your fields. Even the coin in your pouch seemed uncertain here. Some accepted it. Others asked for coins of their own land, stamped with faces you did not know. Language deepened the strangeness. Your words could not reach the ears of many you passed. Their words could not reach yours. Exchanges were made with hands, with gestures, with looks. Sometimes this was enough. Sometimes it was not. Misunderstandings were frequent. A gesture of courtesy might be taken as insult, a request heard as demand, a silence mistaken for refusal. Voices rose, tempers frayed, yet slowly, through trial, some small understanding grew. A smile often bridged more than speech could. Bread offered was bread accepted. Water shared was never refused. Hospitality was known, though in forms different from home. In some villages, strangers offered water, bread, a place to rest. Their customs were not your own, their prayers not spoken to the God you served, yet their kindness carried the same warmth as kindness at home. In others, doors closed, shutters drawn, eyes wary. Strangers were not welcomed here. The company passed quickly, unwilling to press. Hospitality was uncertain. Yet its memory lingered when it was found. The face of a man who poured water into your cup. The smile of a woman who placed food into your hands, asking nothing in return. Customs of faith appeared at every turn. Some knelt at shrines that were not yours. Some bowed toward horizons unfamiliar, their words carried by tones not shaped by Latin or French. Bells were rung, chants lifted, incense burned. It was strange, yet also familiar, for devotion, though spoken differently, bore the same weight. Wherever men dwelled, they prayed. Wherever women walked, they carried tokens of faith. The forms differed, but the need was shared. You walked past these practices with curiosity, sometimes unease, sometimes respect. They were not yours, yet they belonged to others as deeply as yours belonged to you. The animals, too, marked difference. Camels appeared, tall and deliberate, carrying burdens with patient steps. Their shapes seemed almost unnatural at first, their gait strange. Yet they endured miles with little complaint, where horses grew weary. Birds flew in flocks unfamiliar, their calls sharp, unlike those heard in European woods. Sheep bore different coats, goats carried horns curved in other patterns. Even the dogs that wandered villages looked and barked differently. The world itself seemed to remind you, this was not home. For some, the strangeness stirred fear. They spoke of danger in every unfamiliar face, of hidden threats in every new custom. The road was long, and suspicion grew easily in tired hearts. Strangers were distrusted. Villages viewed with unease. Even kindness doubted. For others, the strangeness stirred wonder. They walked with eyes wide, seeing in each new form a sign of the vastness of creation. They marveled at spices, at fabrics, at animals, at words they could not understand but found beautiful. Fear and wonder often walked together. The company carried both, step by step. The land itself changed you. Your eyes grew used to broader horizons, to fields sown with different seed, to villages built of other stone. You learned to walk among people whose words you did not know. You learned to eat foods that were once unfamiliar, to drink from cups carved differently. Slowly, the foreign became less strange. Slowly, the traveler became less of a stranger. The road taught this lesson gently, day after day. And yet, though the land grew familiar, you never ceased to feel the distance. The songs sung at home were not sung here. The bells of your village did not ring. The air itself seemed changed. Even with companions at your side, even with kindness shown by strangers, you carried the quiet ache of absence. You belonged here for a time, but not fully. The land received you, yet it was not yours. In the evenings, as fires were lit, you thought of this strangeness. You looked upon faces not like your own, heard words you could not follow, smelled spices that filled the air with sharpness. The road east was not only hardship, it was discovery. It was the widening of the world mile by mile. And so you walked, no longer only toward Jerusalem, but also into lands that taught you how vast creation was, how many ways men could live, how many prayers could rise to heaven in voices different from your own. To walk east was to enter foreign lands, to endure their strangeness, to learn their gifts, to carry their memory.
The road had been long. Too long, it seemed, for memory to hold. You had walked through forests and plains, across rivers and deserts, past villages strange and familiar, under skies that changed with every season. You had carried hunger, borne thirst, endured heat and cold. You had buried companions, mourned strangers, prayed unceasingly. And yet, through it all, there had always been one word spoken, one name whispered, one hope carried like a light through the dark. Jerusalem. You did not know when you would see it. Each day had begun the same, step upon step, mile upon mile. Each horizon had carried promise, yet revealed only more road. But then, one day, the climb began. The road wound upward, higher, steeper. The air thinned, the company slowed. At the crest of the rise, something shifted. A murmur spread through the weary line. Voices hushed, then quickened. Men craned their necks, shaded their eyes, and then there it was. The city lay before you, distant but clear. Its walls stood against the pale stone of the hills, its towers catching the light of the sun. The dome gleamed, bright as if lit from within. The city spread across its heights, both ancient and alive, its stones heavy with memory. It was not imagination now. It was not only a word carried in prayer. It was there, before your eyes. Jerusalem. The moment stilled you. No voice rose, no laughter stirred. Men stopped in their steps, resting on staffs, leaning on swords, eyes fixed. Some knelt where they stood, the dust of the road clinging to their knees. Some crossed themselves, lips moving in silent prayer. Some wept, tears cutting through the grime of their faces. The city was far, yet near enough to touch the heart. You remembered the sermons spoken at home, the tales of priests and pilgrims, of saints and martyrs. You remembered the vow taken, the cross sewn upon your tunic, the promise whispered at departure. It had all been for this, not for the bread eaten, not for the battles endured, not for the dust walked. All of it had been for the sight of this city, shining before you in the sun. The air seemed different here. It was as though each breath carried weight, filled with centuries of prayer. The hills felt alive with memory, the stones beneath your feet heavy with the steps of countless pilgrims before you. The wind itself whispered of the city. It carried scents not known elsewhere, dust and stone, incense and smoke, a fragrance that seemed at once foreign and familiar. You stood upon the hill, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Some fell silent in awe, others began to sing, voices unsteady at first, then joined by others. Hymns rose, cracked by weariness, but strengthened by devotion. The sound drifted across the hills, carried by the wind, as if answering the city's silent call. The road behind you fell away. The hunger, the thirst, the quarrels, the weariness, all seemed to fade.
Only the city mattered now, bright in the distance. And yet, the sight was not without fear. For the city was not empty. It was held, guarded, defended. Its walls were high, its gates strong, its people wary. The road had not ended with the glimpse. It had only entered its hardest stretch. Some felt their hearts tremble at this thought. Others felt their resolve harden. But for all, the sight of the city was enough to carry them forward. As you descended the hill, the city vanished from view, hidden by the folds of the land. But the image remained, burned upon your eyes. You walked with new strength. Each step carried the memory of the glimpse. Each mile grew lighter, not because the burden was less, but because the goal was near. The city drew you forward like a star, unseen at times, yet guiding always. That night, the camp was different. Fires were lit as always, bread broken, water shared. Yet voices were softer, hearts quieter. Companions sat close, speaking little. Each man carried his own thoughts, his own prayers. For the first time, the end of the road seemed real. For the first time, the vow seemed within reach. Sleep came slowly, for eyes longed to rise again and see the city once more. Dreams carried it, glowing, shining, waiting. The first glimpse became a memory retold. Men spoke of how they saw the walls, how the towers gleamed, how the sun struck the stones. They spoke of the silence, of the prayers, of the tears. Each man remembered it differently, yet all remembered it deeply. The glimpse became more than sight. It became a story, a moment shared, a bond unbroken. To see Jerusalem was to remember why you had walked so far. The road had changed you. The hardships had shaped you. The companions had carried you. But the sight of the city gave it all meaning. It was not just a place. It was a promise fulfilled, a hope made flesh, a dream made stone. For centuries to come, men would tell of this moment, the first glimpse of the holy city after the long road. They would not speak of the dust, or the hunger, or the quarrels. They would speak of this, the shining city on the hill, seen after endless miles, after countless steps. It was a sight that silenced tongues and filled hearts, a sight that turned weariness to devotion, a sight that made pilgrims weep. And so you walked onward, the city before you, the vow within you. The road had brought you here. The road would carry you still. But already, in your heart, Jerusalem was nearer than ever before. The gates stood before you, high, thick, bound in stone. For weeks you had seen the city from afar, its walls rising like a dream against the horizon. Now you stood close enough to touch them. The stones were massive, worn smooth by centuries of sun and wind, heavy with history older than memory. This was not a village, not a town, not even a city like those of Europe. This was Jerusalem. To pass through its gates was to step into a place where every street, every wall, every shadow seemed filled with memory. The air changed as you entered. Outside the walls, the land lay open hills and dust, wind and silence. Within, the air was denser, filled with sound, with fragrance, with motion. Narrow streets pressed close, lined with houses of pale stone. The light struck differently here, bouncing between walls, softened and scattered. Voices echoed in languages you did not know, the cries of vendors, the calls of children, the chanting of prayers, all mingled into a sound unlike any you had heard. It was not loud, yet it was constant, a living murmur. The city itself breathed. Streets wound like veins through the stone. They were narrower than you expected, bending suddenly, opening onto courtyards, then narrowing again. Stairs rose steeply, turning corners, vanishing into shadow. You could not see far ahead. Each turn revealed something new, a market, a shrine, a dwelling, a wall. The city unfolded slowly, step by step, like a book read page by page. It was not a place to be seen at once, but to be discovered, corner by corner. Markets filled many of these streets. Merchants stood behind stalls heavy with goods. Spices lay in heaps of red and gold, their scent rising in waves. Cloth hung in bright folds, dyed with colors deep and rich. Copper vessels gleamed, beaten into shapes both familiar and strange. Fruits unknown to you shone in baskets, their skins glowing. Bread baked on stones filled the air with warmth. Water sellers called out, carrying skins heavy with the weight of thirst. The market was not simply a place of trade. It was a river of life flowing through the city, carrying its voices, its smells, its colors. You walked through it as a stranger. Every eye turned toward you. Some were curious, some wary, some hard. You were not of this city. Your face, your clothes, your voice marked you as other. Children stared, wide-eyed. Women whispered. Men watched with guarded expression. You felt the weight of being foreign, not only in the land, but in the heart of the city itself. And yet you walked on. Shrines appeared at every turn. Some were small, set into walls, a niche with a lamp, a stone worn by countless hands. Others were larger, filled with worshippers, voices rising in prayer. Incense burned, its smoke curling upward. Candles flickered, filling the air with soft light. Each shrine seemed a whisper of devotion carried across centuries. Some bore the marks of faiths not your own. Some belonged to the prayers of others who had walked this land before you. You stepped lightly past them, aware that here, every stone was sacred to someone. The Holy Sepulchre lay within these walls. When at last you reached it, you found not grandeur, but weight. The building was dark, stone upon stone, heavy and solemn. Inside, the air was cool, filled with silence deeper than any you had known. You saw pilgrims kneeling, their hands pressed to stone worn smooth by centuries of touch. You saw candles burning, their flames steady in the stillness. You heard whispers of prayer, carried in voices from many lands, many tongues. Here, the heart stilled. Here, vows felt near their end. Here, silence itself became prayer. The city was not only holy, it was also human. Life continued in its walls, ordinary and constant. Children played in alleys, their laughter echoing between stones. Women carried water jars on their shoulders, walking with steady steps. Men bent to their work, shaping wood, hammering iron, baking bread. The sacred and the ordinary lived side by side. Pilgrims passed shrines, while children chased each other. Priests prayed while merchants argued over coin, incense mixed with the smoke of cooking fires. The city was not only memory, it was also life. Night within the walls carried a different tone. Fires glowed in courtyards, lamps burned in narrow streets. The murmur of voices softened, replaced by the quiet of families gathered indoors. Only prayers rose, still, some carried through the night, echoing softly through stone corridors. The stars were hidden by the walls. The city felt enclosed, sheltered, yet heavy. You lay down to sleep on stone, hearing voices in languages unknown, drifting through the dark. Jerusalem did not sleep. It dreamed. To walk within the walls was to feel both closeness and distance. Closeness, for every stone bore the weight of devotion. Every corner carried the memory of saints, prophets, martyrs. Distance, for the city was not yours, its life not yours to share fully. You were a visitor, a pilgrim, a stranger. And yet for the brief days you walked its streets, it was also yours. Its dust clung to your feet, its air filled your lungs, its memory entered your heart. The journey had been long, the vow had been hard, the road had been endless, but now, within the walls, you knew why you would come. Not for conquest alone, not for honor alone, but for this. To stand in the city that had been prayed for, dreamed of, sought after. To touch its stones, to breathe its air, to see its walls with your own eyes. For some, this was enough. For others, more awaited. But for all, this moment was the heart of the journey. The city would not hold you forever. Soon, the road would call again. Some would stay. Many would leave. All would carry its memory. For once you walked within the walls of Jerusalem, you were never the same. The city entered you, and you entered it. A bond woven not by conquest, but by presence, not by battle, but by being. Within these walls, the Crusader's journey reached its quietest triumph, not in shouts, not in banners, but in silence, in prayer, in stillness. For the holy city had been seen, touched, walked, and for many that was enough. The walls of Jerusalem had been reached, the gates had opened, the stones had been touched, the vow in one sense was fulfilled. But when the first silence settled, when the candles burned low and the voices of prayer grew still, something else began to stir. It was not triumph, it was not relief, it was something quieter, harder to name. It was doubt. The city did not change for your presence. It continued as it had before. Markets alive, prayers spoken, smoke rising from cooking fires. The walls stood as they always had, the stones heavy with centuries. And you, though you had journeyed across mountains, seas, and deserts, though you had carried armor and sword through hunger and thirst, found that the city did not embrace you. It allowed you to walk its streets, but it did not bend to your arrival. You were both inside and apart. Each day, you rose with the sun, walking through narrow streets. You touched shrines. You knelt in churches. You whispered prayers before sacred stones. Yet sometimes, in the silence after prayer, you felt a question rise. Was this what you had sought? Was this the fullness of the vow? The stones were holy, yes, but they were still stone. The air was sacred, yes, but it was still air. The journey had been long. The price had been great. But the end did not erase the cost. Around you, others felt it too. Some tried to hide it, clinging more tightly to prayer, bending lower, speaking louder. Some spoke openly, their voices edged with weariness. We came so far. For this? Others turned their doubt into anger, quarreling with companions, finding fault with strangers, grasping for meaning in conflict, when silence felt too heavy. Yet all of you, in your own way, carried it. Doubt, like a shadow, touched each heart. The city itself seemed to mirror this unease, for not all within the walls welcomed you. Suspicion lingered in glances, conversations hushed when you passed. Strangers' eyes held questions unspoken. This was no empty city waiting for your arrival. It was alive before you came, and it would remain alive when you left. Your presence was not its purpose, and in that realization, something shifted. The road had promised glory, the shrines had promised peace, but the city itself, the living, breathing city, promised only itself. At night, as you lay upon stone floors, you thought of the road behind, of villages where bread was scarce, of companions lost to sickness or sword, of long stretches where thirst burned your throat. You remembered faces no longer beside you. You remembered footsteps that would not echo again, and you asked yourself, had it been worth it? Such questions were not spoken aloud. They drifted only in the silence of the heart. But they lingered, more constant than prayer, more lasting than victory. Doubt is not loud. It does not arrive with shouts. It arrives in stillness. In the moments when the city grows quiet, when footsteps fade, when the fire burns low. It is a whisper, a question, a shadow at the edge of thought. And once present, it does not depart quickly. Some found their answer in faith renewed. They prayed longer, fasted more strictly, walked the shrines with greater devotion. They sought to bury doubt beneath devotion, to cover it in ritual, to silence it with words of scripture. Some succeeded, others did not. For doubt, once awakened, does not easily sleep again. Others found their answer in turning away. When the city did not give them peace, they sought it elsewhere, in taverns, in disputes, in new ambitions. Some dreamed not of pilgrimage, but of possession, of land, of rule. If holiness could not satisfy, perhaps power would. The vow that began with prayer sometimes ended with conquest. But even conquest does not silence doubt. You, like many, stood between these paths. You prayed, but the silence after prayer remained. You walked, but each street felt both sacred and ordinary. You spoke with companions, but in their eyes you saw the same quiet unease. The city was holy, yes, but holiness did not erase the human heart. The heart remained restless. The heart remained questioning. The heart remained itself. One evening, you climbed to a high point within the walls. From there, you could see rooftops spread beneath you, the domes and towers rising in the twilight. The city
was beautiful, more so in the fading light than at midday. The stones glowed soft, the air cooled, the voices softened into song. And yet, looking upon it, you felt the same quiet stirring. The city was holy, yes, but holiness alone did not fill the emptiness left by the road. What you sought, perhaps, was not in the city at all. Perhaps it was in the journey itself. Doubt, when faced directly, shifts shape. It is no longer a question of worth, but a mirror. It shows you what you expected, what you desired, what you feared. Some saw in it their longing for certainty. Others saw their hunger for peace. Still others saw only their own exhaustion, laid bare. The city gave what it could, but the rest, each pilgrim carried within. In time, the shadow of doubt did not leave, but it grew familiar. It became a companion, quiet, constant. Not an enemy, but a reminder that no city, no shrine, no stone can carry the whole weight of the heart. That the vow fulfilled does not end the longing. That the journey continues, even when the destination has been reached. The walls of Jerusalem stood. The shrines glowed with candles. The air was filled with prayer. But within you, another city rose. A city of memory, of longing, of silence. A city not of stone, but of thought. And it was there, within, that the true pilgrimage unfolded. The vow had been carried across mountains and seas. The holy city had been entered. The shrines had been touched. The prayers had been spoken. For many, this was the end. For others, it was only another beginning. Now came the question, do you return or do you remain? The choice was not written in stone. No rule declared when a vow was truly complete. Some said it ended the moment your hand touched the sacred walls. Others said it ended only when you returned to the land from which you came, carrying the memory back across the sea. Each pilgrim measured it differently. Each heart weighed it in silence. And so, in the quiet days that followed, you felt the question grow heavier. The journey that had once been certain, step after step eastward, was now uncertain. For the road no longer pointed only forward. It pointed two ways. To remain was to take root in a foreign land. Some had already chosen it. They settled within the walls or beyond them, building houses, taking work, raising children in a place once only dreamed of. They lived among strangers, slowly weaving themselves into the fabric of the city. They learned the language, traded in the markets, prayed in familiar shrines. Over time, they became not visitors, but residents. For them, return was not needed. The vow had brought them here, and here they would remain. To return was to retrace the long road, westward now, step by step. It was to leave behind the stones of the holy city, carrying only memory. It was to face once more the mountains, the seas, the deserts, to face hunger, thirst, weariness again. It was to go back not as you had come, but changed. To return to villages where you were once known, to family who had waited, to lands that had not seen you in many seasons. To return was not easier than to remain. It carried its own weight. You felt the pull of both. At times, when you knelt in prayer, you longed for home, for the sound of your village, the warmth of your family, the fields where you once worked. You remembered the scent of bread from your hearth, the faces of those who had waited, the quiet rhythm of days left behind. At other times, when you walked the narrow streets, you felt a strange belonging. The city, though foreign, had become part of you. Its stones, its voices, its air had entered your breath. To leave it felt like tearing something away. Both roads carried loss, both carried longing. Companions debated it. Some spoke eagerly of return, their eyes shining at the thought of familiar fields, of rivers they had once fished, of parents, children, brothers, wives. They counted the days until they could see those faces again. Others spoke of staying, their voices steady. They had no land waiting, no family left, no reason to return. For them, the Holy Land was not a dream, but a chance for a new life. They spoke of farms to till, of shops to open, of lives to build. Around the fire, the conversations turned again and again to this: return or remain. No two voices agreed. You listened, but gave no answer, for in truth you did not yet know. You carried both longings, the call of home and the pull of the city. Both felt true, both felt heavy. And so you waited, hoping the answer would come in time. At dawn, the choice felt different than at night. In the soft light of morning, when the city stirred awake, when smoke rose from cook fires and voices lifted in prayer, remaining felt natural. It was easy to imagine a life among these streets, to see yourself growing older here, a stranger no longer. But at nights, when you lay on stone floors, when the stars were hidden by high walls, when silence pressed close, the thought of home returned. You saw in your mind the fields, the rivers, the hearth. You heard voices calling your name. You felt the pull of westward roads. Day and night, the answer shifted. Day and night, the heart changed. The holy city itself gave no guidance. Its stones did not speak. Its shrines did not tell you to go or to stay. Its silence held both paths within it. You began to realize the city was not the end, nor the answer. It was only the place where the question grew clear. The vow had brought you here, but it could not decide what came next. Some pilgrims who returned carried peace. They walked into their villages as those who had touched the sacred, who had seen the city with their own eyes. Their stories were told and retold. Their names were honored. Their hearts rested. Others returned and found restlessness. The city haunted their memory. Their hands, once laid upon sacred stone, could not forget. Their fields felt too small, their days too quiet. They longed again for the east, for the sound of markets, for the sight of walls. Return did not always mean closure. Sometimes it meant longing renewed. Some pilgrims who remained built new lives and found belonging. The city grew familiar. Its language became their own. Its customs, once foreign, became daily rhythm. They grew old in its streets and were buried in its soil. Others remained and felt always the weight of being strangers. No matter how many years passed, they never fully belonged. They lived at the edges, never quite of the city, always marked by difference. Their hearts remained unsettled, their eyes turned westward, their dreams filled with home. To remain did not always mean peace. Sometimes it meant exile unending. And so, the choice was not between peace and unrest. It was between
two forms of longing: return and long again for the east, remain and long again for the west. Either way, the heart carried distance. Either way, a part of you remained unfinished. In time, you understood. The vow was not about completion. It was about journey. The city had been reached, but the journey continued, whether on the road home or in the streets of a new life. The vow did not end at the gates of Jerusalem. It lived on in the silence of your choices, in the shadows of your days. You stood once more at the walls, as you had when first you entered. The stones rose high, the air was still, the city breathed quietly around you. Before you lay two roads, one westward toward home, one inward toward a life here. Both were uncertain, both were true. And so you chose, not with clarity, not with certainty, but with the quiet strength that had carried you across mountains and seas. For in the end, return or remain, the journey itself was the vow. The vow had carried you east, step by step, mile by mile, across lands you had never seen. Now it carried you west. The journey home began not with triumph, but with silence. The holy city lay behind you. The road stretched before you once more. Leaving was not easy. You turned once, twice, to look back at the walls. The stones glowed faintly in the morning light, unchanged, unmoved. They would remain as they always had, as they always would. You had touched them. You had walked within them. But now you walked away. Each step westward felt like parting. Each mile carried both relief and ache. The road was not gentler in return. The mountains still rose steep. The desert still burned with heat by day and chilled with frost by night. The seas still waited restless, wide, unyielding. What had been endured once must be endured again. The path was not erased by memory. It unfolded anew, demanding the same patience, the same endurance, the same silence. The vow might be fulfilled, but the journey was not finished. Companions thinned as the road stretched. Some chose to remain behind, settling in the Holy Land. Others parted ways at crossroads, returning to villages far from your own. The band that had once been many grew fewer, until only a handful remained at your side. Some days you walked alone, your footsteps the only sound in the dust. You had begun the journey as part of a great host. You returned as part of a remnant. The body bore the marks of travel. Your armor was worn thin, its plates dented, its straps frayed. Your cloak hung in tatters, your feet bore calluses upon calluses. Scars traced your skin, from sword, from sun, from hunger. The body that returned was not the body that had departed. It carried the map of the journey upon it, etched in lines of wear. Each scar, each ache, each hollow in the face was a memory of the road. Villages along the way received you differently than before. When you had traveled east, strangers had looked with curiosity, sometimes with suspicion. Now they looked with recognition. They knew what you had seen, where you had been. Some offered bread and water freely, honoring your journey. Others kept distance, wary of foreign dust and foreign ways you carried back. You walked through them quietly, neither seeking honor
nor fearing suspicion. The road did not pause for welcome or for doubt. At night, the stars became familiar again. They were the same stars that had guided you eastward, now guiding you westward. The constellations you had studied in youth returned, steady, patient. You lay upon the ground and looked upward, realizing the heavens were unchanged. It was you who had shifted. The stars had watched as you left, they now watched as you returned. They did not speak, but their silence felt like a companion. The seas waited as they had before. You boarded ships once more, hearing the creak of wood, the crash of waves, the endless rhythm of water. Salt filled the air. The wind pulled at your cloak. The horizon stretched without end. The voyage was no gentler than the first. Storms rose, sickness spread. The sea, as always, demanded patience, demanded humility. Yet this time, the fear was less sharp. You had crossed it before. You knew now its vastness, its danger, its silence. And so you stood on deck, steady, eyes fixed westward. Dreams grew stronger as you neared home. You saw faces in sleep, parents, brothers, wives, children, friends. You heard voices calling your name. You smelled the bread of your own hearth, the earth of your own fields. Some dreams woke you in tears. Others left you quiet, eyes wet, lips curved in a faint smile. The heart had carried these faces across the eastward miles. Now, at last, they felt near again. And yet, unease remained. You wondered, would home be as you remembered? Would the fields still be green, the rivers still bright, the village still unchanged? Would the faces you dreamed still wait for you? Time had passed. Seasons had turned. You had been away longer than you once thought possible. Perhaps you would return to joy. Perhaps you would return to absence. The road carried both hopes, both fears. When at last you saw familiar land, your steps quickened. The fields stretched out, green beneath the sun. The rivers glimmered. The cottages stood as you remembered. Smoke rose from hearths. Voices drifted on the air. It was both the same and not the same. You were both the same and not the same. Home received you, but it received a stranger. The return was quiet. There were no banners, no trumpets, no feasts. There were only faces, wide-eyed, tearful, astonished. There were embraces, long and trembling. There were silences, filled with meaning no words could carry. The journey was spoken of, yes, in stories told by the fire, in questions asked, in answers given slowly. But soon the words faded, and life returned to its rhythm. The fields still needed tending. The bread still needed baking. The days still moved forward. And you, though marked by the road, bent again to the rhythm of ordinary time. Yet within you, the road never ended. The memory of mountains, deserts, seas, and walls remained. The holy city lived within you, carried in thought, in silence, in dream. You worked the fields, but in the sound of the wind you heard distant chants. You sat by the hearth, but in the glow of the fire you saw candles burning in stone chapels. You walked familiar paths, but in your steps you felt again the dust of distant lands. Return was not forgetting. Return was remembering, quietly, always. The long road home was not the end of the journey. It was only its folding back into life. The vow had been fulfilled. The city had been touched. The return had been made.
But the road lived on, in scars, in silence, in memory. For once you have walked that far, once you have carried such weight, the journey does not leave you. You carry it always. You are never only home again. You are always also the road. The journey did not end when the road ended. It lingered, it followed, it whispered in the quiet hours of night, and it stirred in the silence of the fields. The vow had been fulfilled. The holy city had been seen, touched, prayed within. The long road home had been walked, and yet the journey remained. It had become part of you. At first, the echoes came in dreams. You closed your eyes, and the desert returned. Heat pressed upon your skin. The horizon shimmered. The air rippled. You woke with sweat on your brow, as if the sun of Judea had slipped into your chamber. Another night you dreamed of the sea, endless, rolling, swelling, the creak of timbers, the cry of gulls, the heave of your stomach with each pitch of the waves. You opened your eyes and still felt the rocking beneath you. Though your bed lay steady on the earth, the road had carved itself into your sleep. By day, the echoes came in smaller ways, a sound, the clang of a hammer on iron, brought back the weight of armor being buckled before battle. A smell of baking bread rising warm from the hearth carried you to a night when a stranger had shared his last loaf by the roadside. A voice, calling across a field, echoed a cry you once heard in a distant market. Foreign words shouted, haggled, bartered. The ordinary became layered. The present always carried the shadow of the past. Sometimes the echoes were sharp, the sight of blood, from a cut finger, from a slaughtered animal, was enough to call forth the battlefield. You saw again the clash of sword and shield, the dust rising, the cries piercing. Sometimes they were soft. The sound of church bells at dawn reminded you of prayers whispered by candlelight, far away, when you and your companions knelt shoulder to shoulder in silence. The echoes could wound. The echoes could comfort. Both were true. The people around you began to notice. They saw how you paused sometimes, staring at nothing, lost in a memory they could not enter. They heard the silence in your voice when you answered their questions, choosing carefully which pieces of the journey to speak aloud. They wondered why you sometimes walked out at night, alone, into the fields, standing still beneath the stars, as though listening for a voice they could not hear. Seasons turned. Winter came, and you remembered the cold marches through mountains, frost biting into bone. Spring bloomed, and you remembered the orchards in distant valleys, where blossoms fell upon your cloak as you walked. Summer burned, and the desert rose again in your memory, scorching, unending. Autumn passed, and you remembered harvest feasts in villages that were not your own, where strangers had welcomed you as brother for a night. The years became a second road, each season bringing back another step, another mile, another echo. The body too bore its memory. A scar on the arm throbbed when rain approached. A broken rib from long ago ached when you bent to lift. The calluses never fully smoothed. The hands always felt the memory of sword and shield. Even when no one else saw it, you carried the marks. The road had shaped your flesh as surely as it had shaped your spirit. Some echoes were shared. In villages nearby, other pilgrims had returned. You met them sometimes in the marketplace or passing on the road. There was a glance, a flicker of recognition. No words needed. They too had walked it. They too carried it. When you spoke slowly, cautiously, as if the memory itself were fragile. You spoke not to relive, but to remind one another that you had not imagined it, that it had been real, that the road had indeed stretched before you, and you had walked it together. And sometimes you remained silent. Not every echo was meant to be told. There were nights, images, shadows that words could not carry without breaking. So you held them quietly within. You bore them in silence, as you had borne the vow before. The road taught you endurance. Now it taught you silence. Years passed. Children grew. Fields yielded. Villages shifted. Life moved steadily forward. But the echoes did not fade. They softened, perhaps. They sank deeper, like roots. But they did not vanish. The holy city still stood in your mind. The sea still rolled. The desert still burned. The stars still watched. Even when your hair silvered, even when your body slowed, the road remained within you, whole, unbroken. At times you wondered, had the road changed the world, or had it only changed you? The Holy Land was far away still, beyond deserts, seas, and mountains. Battles were fought, treaties signed, borders shifted. Yet here, your village was still your village. The fields were still the fields. The river still ran its course. The world at large did not seem to have moved with you. But within, everything was different. The echoes whispered. The change had been yours, not the world's. You carried the memory into your last years. Sitting by the fire, you felt the warmth of distant candles. Walking slowly to the chapel, you felt the weight of processions you had once joined. Lying in bed at night, you heard again the steps of your companions on the road, steady, endless, like a drumbeat carrying you through the miles. The echoes had become not burdens, but companions. They walked with you into age, reminding you of the vow, the city, the silence. In time, you knew the end of your journey approached. Not another road, not another sea, only the final crossing, the one that waits for all. And you wondered, when that day came, would you walk it alone? Or would the echoes walk with you? Would you see again the faces of your companions? Would you feel again the desert wind, the spray of the sea, the stone of the walls beneath your hand? Would you hear again the bells, the chants, the silence? The thought did not frighten you, it steadied you, for if the journey had never left you, perhaps it would also not leave you then. The road, you realized, was not only a path across earth, it was a path across time, across memory, across spirit. You had walked it once with your feet. You walked it now with your mind, your heart, and perhaps one day you would walk it again in ways beyond knowing. The echoes were not endings, they were continuations. The vow was fulfilled, but the journey lived on, always, endlessly, quietly. And so the road grows still, the dust settles, the footsteps fade. You have walked beside the Crusader, from the first vows spoken at home, to the weary steps across deserts, to the long-awaited glimpse of the holy city, and at last to the quiet return. You have seen the burdens carried, the prayers whispered, the bread broken, the companions gained and lost. Now the story softens. It becomes less a march, more a murmur. Less a tale of distance, more a tale of memory. The journey does not end. It simply changes shape. Every road leaves marks. You may forget the milestones, but the body remembers the weariness. You may forget the dates, but the heart remembers the longing. You may forget the names, but the soul remembers the silence shared with others. For the Crusader, the echoes of the journey lingered long after the road itself had ended. And so too for us, each story walked leaves its imprint. You need not have crossed mountains or seas. You need not have worn armor or carried a sword. Even the quiet days of your own life carry their roads, their burdens, their prayers. The past does not vanish when it slips from sight. It walks beside us, softly, unseen. Perhaps this is why stories matter. They give shape to journeys long gone. They hold within them the voices of the forgotten, the songs of the weary, the silence of the faithful. The Crusader's road is far from ours in time, and yet, does it not feel close? The hunger, the thirst, the dust, the longing for something beyond the horizon, are these not things that still live in us? Every road, in every age, carries the same heartbeat. Step after step toward a promise glimpsed, but not yet touched. The road is endless, and so are its echoes. The Crusaders' vow had been for Jerusalem, a city of stone and prayer, distant and shining. But in time, he discovered that the city was not only on the hill, it was within. In the silence of prayer, in the strength of companionship, in the endurance of hunger, in the resilience of the weary body, there too lay the holy city. Perhaps this is what journeys reveal, that the places we seek outside ourselves are often mirrors of what already lives within us. The walls, the gates, the towers of stone, they remind us of the walls, the gates, the towers of the soul. The city without and the city within, both waiting, both holy. You may think of those who walked beside you in the story, the nameless companions, the friends whose steps matched your own. Some fell, some endured, some faded into memory. Their names are not written in stone, but their presence mattered. Each voice lifted in song, each hand sharing bread, each shoulder steadying yours. All of these remain, even if no chronicler wrote them down. So too in life, not all companions are remembered by history, not all friendships are recorded in books, but still they shape us. Still they walk with us. The story of the road is also the story of those who walked it with you. Seasons moved in the Crusader's tale. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, circling again and again. And in our own lives, time passes just the same. The road is long, but it is not hurried. It teaches patience. It teaches endurance. It teaches the rhythm of time that is larger than us, wider than us, older than us. Every step carries us forward. But every step also reminds us of how vast the world is, how steady the turning of days and nights. We are small upon the road, and yet the road welcomes us all the same. Now, as you listen, the night has perhaps grown deeper around you. The room is dim. the air is still. And in this silence, the echoes of the journey seem closer. The campfires of the Crusader glow in memory. The soft chanting of prayers drifts faintly in the air. The stars above the desert sky shine steady, eternal. Close your eyes and you may almost hear the sound of footsteps fading into the distance. Not hurried, not urgent, just steady, calm, unending. The road continues even here, even now. For every road has its rest. The Crusader found it, not in battle, not in glory, but in quiet reflection, in the silence of old age, in the whispers of memory. And we too find it, not always in grand moments, but in the stillness of nights like this one. There is peace in rest. There is holiness in silence. There is completion in simply allowing the road to end gently, without resistance. Rest is not the absence of the journey, it is its fulfillment. And so, as this story closes, you may carry with you only what you wish, not every detail, not every mile, just a whisper, a fragment, a gentle echo. Perhaps you will remember the weight of armor, heavy and constant. Perhaps the taste of bread shared on the roadside. Perhaps the glimpse of Jerusalem shining on the hill. Perhaps the silence of prayer, unbroken and deep. These are enough. Stories are not burdens to bear, but companions to walk with us. When we tire, they remind us of endurance. When we hunger, they remind us of sustenance. When we falter, they remind us of hope. Carry only what you need. The rest may fade into silence. And now, as our journey together draws to its end, the road falls quiet once more. The Crusader has returned. His vow is fulfilled. His story, like all stories, has softened into echo. And you have walked beside him, step by step, in the hush of the night. Let the road rest now. Let the dust settle. Let the city gleam quietly in memory, no longer distant, no longer urgent. You have walked enough for tonight. You have prayed enough, endured enough, remembered enough. It is time to rest, wherever you are, whether in a quiet room, in a city alive with noise, or in a small village surrounded by fields. May this story bring you calm. May your own roads be steady. May your companions be kind. May your burdens be lightened. And may you always find a place of rest at the end of the day. The journey is long, but the night is gentle. The road continues, but for now, you may close your eyes. Sleep well, traveler. The echoes will walk with you. Good night.